Hi, fourth graders. It's Mrs. O'Donnell. I've missed you a lot, and I'm hoping to put up some read-alouds that your teachers can send out on the Google Classroom, so you have a chance to have a little in-home library session. So what I thought for fourth graders was that we would pick back up where we left off. It was in February, actually, with the A Bear Named Trouble book. So I think we're about a little more than halfway through the book. So I'm going to refresh you on the main characters and setting and all of that so we can get back to where we were. And then you can just sit back and relax and listen to the story. So again, the book, A Bear Named Trouble by Marion Dane Bower. And as a refresher, the main characters are Jonathan, who's 10 years old, a brown bear who's just been released a couple months before by his mother, which made him very sad. But that's a typical age, about 3 years to 3.5 years. Mothers separate from their cubs. And then the setting is in Anchorage, Alaska. Remember, the boy and his dad, Jonathan and his dad, have moved from Duluth, Minnesota, where his dad was a zookeeper, to Anchorage. And then mom and his younger sister are going to meet him at the end of the school year back in Duluth. So he's separated from his sister who has special needs and his mom. And then the interesting thing about this book is the point of view. We have alternating voices in this book, equally among Jonathan's point of view and the brown bear's point of view. And when we last left the story, I don't want to call him a cub, but he's kind of a cub. He's a young brown bear. He has been kicked in the jaw by a moose, so he has a broken jaw. He's super lonely for his mom, who he feels abandoned him. He's wandered away from their nesting area, into more of a suburban area, and he has stumbled onto the porch at Jonathan's house where he got some food. And then his house is right next to the zoo where his dad works. And so the bear dug under a couple of fences and found himself sort of pacing in front of another brown bear in the zoo whose name is Jake, wanting to get in because he wants to find a friend. And then he hurried out one night, but now in the last chapter that we read, the bear has once again crawling under the fences, but this time Mama Goose, who is Jonathan's favorite animal at the zoo, has started to honk really loudly, and the brown bear, being very confused and annoyed, took a swipe at him and killed the goose. So that's where we left off. Jonathan is horrified, and he's picked up his goose and starts to run home. So we are now on chapter 8, Trouble. He killed her. He killed Mama Goose. She's dead. The words erupted from Jonathan in a shout. He filled the night air with his outrage the whole way home. He shouted and sobbed and ran, clutching the white goose close to his chest. He kept picking up her head, trying to keep it from dangling so pitifully. But each time the silence of the feathery head, the unnatural weight of it in his hand, made his fingers go slack, and he let it fall again. He tumbled through his sliding deck door and hurtled up the stairs to his dad's bedroom. Halfway between the bedroom door and the bed, Jonathan stopped and shouted it all again. He killed her! He killed Mama! She's dead! His father lurched upright out of bed, rising so fast that Jonathan stepped back a couple of steps. But he didn't stop crying out, "She's dead! She's dead!" What? His dad's brown hair stood in spikes all over his head, and his eyes were open so wide that they were rimmed all the way around with white. "Johnny, what is it? What's wrong?" "That bear," Jonathan was sobbing now. He leaned back against the wall next to the door. "That bear, he killed Mama Goose." "Oh," his father said, "Oh, Mama Goose." And his spine suddenly slumped. I thought, he didn't say what he had thought, but he just reached out as if to capture Jonathan's hand. But Jonathan was too far away from him to reach. "Come here, son. You were having a dream. Only a dream. That bear isn't going to hurt any..." But when Jonathan approached, a thin beam of moonlight fell across the goose clutched to his chest, and Dad's gaze fastened there. "What?" He reached out and touched Mama Goose's dangling head, just lightly. Then he reached beyond the goose to the front of Jonathan's muddy jacket. "Where have you been?" He was fully awake now. He even ran a hand through his standing-up hair to smooth it down. "That bear," Jonathan gasped for breath. "That brownie that broke into the zoo, he did it again, and this time he killed her." Dad had his feet on the floor now. His bare feet looked pale and somehow very naked. He reached for a robe and slippers. "You were there?" His voice was stern, but when he lifted Mama Goose from Jonathan's grasp and put a hand on his shoulder to lead him back downstairs, his touch was gentle. First, Dad opened the sliding door and laid the dead goose on the snowy deck. And then he closed the door again, and brushing his hands on his robe as if something about death might cling to him, he pulled the drapes closed. Jonathan let his knees give away and he sank to the couch. "Now tell me," his father said, coming to stand in front of him. "I want to hear all of it." Jonathan told all of it between hiccuping sobs, about luring the bear to the deck by putting out the loaf of bread, about following him into the zoo under the fence, about seeing him strike Mama Goose. As Jonathan spoke, his father's lips grew thinner, tighter. But when he finally fell silent, Dad said only, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry it happened, son. And I'm especially sorry that you were there to see it." And without another word, he headed back toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" Jonathan asked, suddenly wanting more than anything else for his father not to leave. "I have to go over there," Dad said, stopping at the foot of the stairs, "to see what other mischief that bear might be getting into. I need to call the curator, too, and I'll take Mama Goose back where she belongs." "May I come?" Jonathan asked, but he knew the answer. Of course not. For the first time, his father sounded impatient, as he surely was. He hadn't even mentioned yet all the rules Jonathan had broken tonight, but he would get to that later. Jonathan was sure of that. His father came back to stand in front of him again. "You stay here and see if you can get that mud off your jacket. You'll need it for school tomorrow." He paused, studying his son closely, as though he might be wondering if he'd made a mistake bringing him here to Anchorage. But then he continued in his ordinary father-in-charge voice. "And clean yourself up, too. Then go to bed. Get right into bed and don't get out of it again until morning. Do you understand?" "I'll be back as soon as I can." "Why can't I..." Jonathan started to say, but his father whirled to face him, his eyes flashing, and Jonathan shrank back into the couch cushions. "Yes, sir," he said. He didn't know where that had come from, sir. He had never called his father sir in his life. But then he'd never seen his father this angry before either. "I promise." "You'd better," his father said, his voice low. And then he added, "We're going to have plenty to talk about when I get back." He hurried up the stairs. Jonathan looked down at his muddy jacket. Was Mama Goose muddy too? He'd had to crawl out beneath the fence as he'd gone in, holding her the whole time. There was no other way out without a key. Had he gotten Mama Goose muddy? Somehow, he didn't know why, the idea of her pure white feathers being caked with mud seemed the final insult. He'd never seen her when her feathers weren't clean. But then, being dead changed everything, didn't it? Everything in the world. So now at this point in the book, the font becomes italic, which for me, the reader, means that now we're switching to the point of view of the bear. The young bear had walked up and down the fence, enclosing the older male, but could find no way to get closer. Jake, the other bear, had paced on his side too, sniffed through the fence and then paced some more. It was Jake who gave up first, turning back into his enclosure to sleep. And then the young bear, abandoned once more, retraced his steps through the zoo. He found bits of food here and there, stopped to sniff the place where the white goose had lain, and then bellied under the inner fence, around the perimeter, and decided to go no farther. He took a long drink from the creek before he curled up in a snowy depression in the ground between the two fences and dozed. He didn't come awake until he heard the voices of the humans moving closer. He listened, his head raised, his ears pivoting to catch every nuance of sound. Finally, he rose slowly, walked over to the hole underneath the outer fence that he had dug earlier, and he shimmied out the way he had come in. The searching men again found footprints in the fresh snow up and down in front of Jake's pen. They found a few scattered white feathers, and they found a new hole dug under both of the outside perimeter fences. "I think," Jonathan's father said, "we should name this bear Trouble. That's certainly what he's gotten into lately." And that's the end of chapter 8. Oh, I wanted to mention to you, you may have noticed these aren't my regular glasses. My regular glasses broke, and since the glasses store is closed, I have to rely on my backup pair, which aren't my favorite, but they do just fine. Okay, we'll talk to you in the next episode.